Hello everyone and welcome. In this video I'm going to discuss my thoughts and process behind recreating Spyro the Dragon from the Reignited series in ZBRUSH. So first of all, why Spyro and why the Reignited version? The Reignited version, I have to be honest, is simply my favourite one. I just really like the design. I like the HDness and the higher fidelity. It just feels significantly more polished. Whereas I personally played a lot of the classic series, and the Legend of the Spyro trilogy was in particular my favourites. I really couldn't help but feel very bonded with the Reignited version. Just something about, I guess it's just probably how bright and colourful it is, how upbeat it is, and how it really calls back to his more original roots. I don't know, there's just something very fond about it which I really like, and I figured that if I was going to make any version of Spyro, it would also just make sense to make the more updated recent version. If I had to choose any other, it would be the Legend of Spyro instead. Speaking of which, I can imagine a couple of Dark Spyro requests, and don't worry, that is coming. But moving on, so why Spyro himself? Well, quite simply, it's a childhood favourite character of mine. Spyro the Dragon, Sonic the Hedgehog, and Crash Bandicoot were all my three favourite childhood characters or video game characters in my childhood. So I really like all these characters, with Spyro in particular being my favourite. Not because it's a dragon, surprisingly enough, but mainly actually because of the mechanics, the attitude and personality. I like the ability to fly and breathe fire, which I know is synonymous with playing a dragon, but it wasn't the dragon about it. It was just a really cool mechanics, and it was just really fun to play. So like I said, overall the sculptures have been a much more of a passion project and something that I've personally been wanting to do. Not only that, but as I had mentioned in my previous Zenogre video, this Spyro video is the first of a series of brand new styles, with this one far predating the Zenogre video. And that main style being is that I want to try getting into fan art a lot more often. While I've done plenty of fan art and things like Spore, I've not really been doing it so much as in ZBRUSH, and I've definitely not really been doing it in... The best way I can word it is a more passionate way, just making characters that I like, just because I like them. And Spyro here was the first of that upcoming series. Not only that, but also to really push myself, try very different things than what I'd normally do, different styles, different techniques, different different methods, if you will, just overall rethinking how I do sculptures, and I think it's been an absolutely awesome experiment, as you'll see in this one, in my next video coming after this one, and of course in Zenogre, who is technically the third in the series. So one of the major changes when it came to my whole sculpting with these three models, in particular Spyro here, was the use of using primitive shapes as opposed to warping and stretching the mesh. So like I mentioned in the Zenogre video, what I normally do with most of my sculpts is I'll take the sphere, I'll take the default sphere that you were given when you first make a project, and I'll stretch it, I'll warp it, I'll dynamesh it, I'll realign the polygons, I'll stretch it and warp it again, and I kind of just like, yeah, stretch it, to be honest, into whatever forms I want. And while it's not technically a wrong thing to do, I have since learned that it does create some rather inconsistent shapes. Sometimes it looks a little bit strange, a little bit off, and it's just a very subtle thing, but it's a subtle thing that you really do notice by the time it's done. Not to mention it takes significantly longer. Whereas this time round, especially because Spyro and the other characters I've been doing are much rounder, cartoonish, they have a much more simplified shape and style, and that would have really complemented the whole primitives technique. So by the primitive technique, I mean by just simply importing in lots of spheres, lots of cylinders, lots of cubes, cones, etc. Just really simple primitive shapes. I will warp them a little bit, but typically more in the case of transforming them to be longer or stouter, etc., and just shaping it and piecing it all together, and then merging it significantly later, but making sure that the core simplified shapes are there. As we can currently see in the model right now, you can see how a lot of the shapes are still very much separated, in particular his face, how for a long time Spyro's face was simply a very strange looking sphere with a block for his snout, some tubes or cylinders that were shaping his cheeks, and of course the flat circles like his eyes and the big eyebrows. The circles and the eyebrows remain separated, of course, because they are very large, bold shapes, but for the rest of it, It was as simple as that, just these really large, ugly looking shapes. And I have to emphasize that it did look really ugly. Like I said, with this sculpt being the first of just an entirely brand new way of thinking and approaching models, the face on this one was really quite a struggle. It was very ugly and very uncanny for such a long time that it really did take quite a bit of an inner battle not to scrap it and redo it. I'm a firm believer that don't give up your model, don't give up your project, your artworks, etc. Just don't give up just because you don't like how it looks yet. Keep on going and make it work. And the more frequently you can make it work, the more confidence you will have in knowing that you can do it again and again. That has been my case here, where I absolutely despised the face. It was looking so bizarre, but I kept pushing myself, kept on trying different things until eventually it all just worked together. Speaking of working together, or working in general, as we're looking at the horns right now, I don't know, man. The horns just came out fantastically, like both in terms of the sculpture and the texturing later on. The texturing, I gotta say, kind of blew me away. And I understand just how silly that sounds to say about my own sculpt, but again, trying lots and lots of new things, and I don't know, something about the horns just came out so fantastically polished, and I was really, really happy about it. But we're not quite on the horns yet, are we? We've still got like the basic shape of them. Currently we're working on the final, or the first bit of posing. So another major part about these models is I want them to be more posing friendly. Now, posing in 3D is a very peculiar thing. Typically, I'd say the recommended, the most effective and efficient, etc., the recommended type of way that you do posing in models is to do the model properly. What I mean by that is create like a low resolution version, get a UV map, color it, rig it, give it a skeleton, and then actually pose it later on. I don't do that, I don't know how to do that yet, but I am learning. So until then, what I personally do is have a very high resolution model, and then if any of you have tried using like a high resolution model, you know that as you try to turn or warp anything, it warps badly. Like, it's not as simple as just turning the head and everything's fine. You'll notice that the neck will entirely tear apart. There's wrinkles, there's stretches, everything is horrible and ugly. In short, because I do high poly models, it is significantly harder for me to pose things and change things around, especially if it is, well, high poly. If it already has details and everything, it is just nightmarish. So like I said, another point about doing the whole primitive style is that by keeping the shapes very, very simple, having it all in place but not quite merged yet, gave me a lot of freedom to pose it very early on. Now, Spyro here has been a very simple pose. It's just like the front cover and some of the Reignited artwork, where it's just looking at the camera with his wings outstretched with a bit of a cocky expression. Very simple, but intentionally based on that artwork. And that was just a very light bit of posing that allowed me to touch on it, to get a bit of practice without really, you know, trying to do more than I can handle yet. And I felt like it was a good start. So it was a really good start to learning how to do this. Speaking of learning, a good start, the coloration on this thing. So as you can see right now, we're working on the colours. And you'll notice I keep on mixing the material back and forth. I keep it going from the typical rendered shadowed material to an entirely flat colour. Now, this ended up being the discovery and start of something beautiful. The reason why I first used a flat colour and removed all the shadows entirely was because as I was referencing a lot of artwork, in particular some fan art, I wanted this to have like a very nice, rich colour scheme. But when I gave Spyro just a simple purple colour scheme, it's just flat purple on the shadowed material, I think it was on a Skin Paint 2 or Skin Paint 4, which is a very nice, bright, bold one. When I gave it a simple purple, it just looked really flat. It just didn't look very flattering at all. I wanted this to be bright and colourful, something completely different to what I normally do. And as I was comparing it to all the different fan art, concept art, official art, etc., one thing I noticed was they added a lot of pink. They added quite a fair few bits of pink highlights in some of the more fleshy areas and parts of the face, parts of the elbows and biceps, and that led me to start experimenting. So as I added in a bit of the pink, it then made the rest of the purple feel really just drab and plain. So I added a couple of more shades, a couple of more textures, and then because I did so much of that work into the purple, I felt like I had to reinforce that into the other sections, such as the orange spikes, the wings, etc, etc. And in the end, the result was that every time I went back into a shadowed material, I just noticed that the colours were just getting increasingly richer, that even though the majority of these shades and highlights were missed in the shadows, in the more natural rendered shadows, even though a lot of them were very mist and very subtle, it just added so much life to the colour scheme. And it was something that I was extremely satisfied with and wanted to keep on chasing. Like I said, I don't normally do bright, colourful things, and that was one of my main goals of this sculpture. So seeing it worked, like I said, I kept on chasing it, I kept on doing it more and more. And what I very quickly learned is that by having the model be this completely flat colour scheme, or a completely flat material with no shadows, I was able to really go just absolutely nuts in terms of the variety of shades and tones in areas that you wouldn't normally think about. And I have to say, it was really fun. Texturing is one of my favourite parts of modelling in general. I just love texturing, I love shading, and this just let me go absolutely crazy and have all the fun in the world. And it just felt so satisfying to see it properly rendered, full on, and just see how everything popped out. Overall, I absolutely loved this. Like, I say that a lot. I keep on trying new things, and I keep on trying to have like these new models that look better and push my limits. But this one in particular, maybe it's because of Spyro, maybe it's because this was more of a passion project. Just something I felt like doing one day, just wanted to do something that was more reminiscent of my childhood. I don't know, I just had so much fun with it, and I think it really shows in how it came out in the end. It was a really simple model in the end. I mean, it took a fair couple of hours, but I just had so much fun doing it. And as I mentioned, this is indeed the first of 3. So I've got this one, my next up one, and then Zenogra after that. And I think you could tell in both this and Zenogra that it just looks so much different compared to my other models. And overall, yeah, I was just really happy, and I just couldn't wait to do more. Hence the next one coming after this. I keep on alluding to it because I wanted to be a bit of a surprise, but spoilers, it's a dragon. As always, guys, thank you very, very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something from it. Hey, even better, I hope you're inspired. And speaking of being inspired, I really have to thank my patrons for inspiring me to just generally be the best I can and keep on pushing myself. And I really have to give a thorough thanks to Annie and Cyborg Squid, my tea and lungs, and PewDiePie, Orloki, Frostbite, Speedy Tig, and Unreal, my 5 red dragons. Thank you, all of you, and thank you to the entire Patreon community for letting me keep on doing what I'm doing now. As always, guys, have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all later.